sorry, compliance is appreciated.
All the way from the Witcherland, from the developer 11-Bit Studios, released in 2024, comes a sequel to the critically acclaimed game that won our hearts by feeding the poor with sawdust and forcing children to work in the mines.
Okay, looking good, Child Rebel Force!
Frostpunk 2 unfortunately did not win my heart. After spending quite a bit of time with it, I've settled on a conclusion that it's neither good nor bad. In my view, it traded too much intimacy for scale and ended up somewhere in the middle of the road. So here I'll share all of my problems in great detail, as well as some things I did enjoy.
Abstraction.
In Frostpunk 1 you are close. You could see these poor people trudging through snow to execute your tasks. You see funerals, you see changes in society as banners unfurl, towers rise, and once you stop to reflect, you may just realize that building by building, brick by brick, you might have just built a concentration camp. In Frostpunk 2 your camera is way up in the clouds. People are counted in thousands, they are a number, a statistic. You can still see them, but they are nothing more than a visual effect, flickering in and out of existence like ghosts. Raw resources like wood and iron are bunched up into materials, which creates a funny situation. Though the process is too long to explain to give it justice, you can gain more out of a sum of all materials that you started with. It's like, imagine I have an ice cube, I turn it into water, then I turn it back into ice. But I was so good at it, the amount of ice cubes tripled. I'm sorry, but no matter how much amphetamines you feed to your populace, this is just not possible.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
It is absurd, and it comes from not being careful with the abstraction. Now you build an entire district, and hexagons are of course the bestagons. Mechanically they are no doubt better than a circular layout, but stop to think on what has been lost. Aesthetically, circular design looks beautiful and unique, but also thematically it fits so well. In a setting where heat equals life and the sole provider of heat is the generator, of course people are going to build as close to it as possible. That forms a circle. So aesthetics themselves contain a meaning, and I think developers understand that as they form circular patterns with the uninteractable infrastructure after you build districts, trying to preserve their voice. Visually, districts themselves have lost all the character. They easily blur between themselves and become an abstract mess. You can zoom, sure, but nobody is going to play this way. 99% of the time you will be flying up in the skies and looking at this growing mold in the snow. Not memorable and not very pleasant either.
User interface.
Narratively, Prologue could have been cut out entirely. It doesn't serve the story in any meaningful way, and its only purpose is to be a tutorial. And the best tutorial is no tutorial. Create rich, intuitive UI and you won't need to teach the player much at all. You won't need to have this codex nobody reads, no matter how much animated pictures you put in there. User interface in Frostpunk 2 is serviceable. Half the time it does exactly what it needs to do, half the time it doesn't. It was very confusing to figure out where the frost-covered areas are. At first I thought it was this scratched out looking zone, but that's just the game telling you that you can't do whatever you're about to do. In short, indication for not frost-broken areas needed to be there. At this stage you can only infer where it is. Allow players to start doing the wrong thing and then tell them why it's wrong. It's a great teaching method, but I just want to share a funny consequence of not taking that approach. There is a district and you can extend it by 3 tiles in any direction. Let's imagine it's surrounded by frost-covered tiles and clear tiles are separated. Now, because the game got it all figured out for you, it will graciously not allow you to even start extending in a direction where it can't find 3 tiles. So you have to convince the UI that it's possible by frost breaking in one direction just to build on the tiles that were available all along. What? No! I can't. Why not? I feel like I was able to do it before, like put one here and then it allows me to put 2 here. Like this. Oh my god, this is so ridiculously stupid actually. So I need to pretend as if we have extra space on this side, because this does not allow me to put it unless it has 3 Besides, even though later it still will allow me to put 1 here and then 2 here. Oh my god. Laws and ideas mentioned outside the tree should have better reference. You can't expect me to know what this is about just by mentioning a name, especially bad when it happens in the event from which you can't escape and check the tree. All I need to know is what this law or idea does and what are the alternatives. That's it. In the first chapter, the game still feels like a continuation of tutorial. Quest shows you exactly where to look for oil, even though in the context of the story you are supposed to be wandering, you are supposed to be feeling on the edge, lost and desperate, but it just points you where to go. A lot of these objectives are arbitrary, but the most egregious example is when the quest insists on making every district warm. This is not paramount to survival. This only exists so the story could have its beat. This overly invasive hand-holding takes a lot of agency away, lessens the dramatic tension, and narrows the variety of playstyles that would have been achievable. There is a detail in the law screen that I really liked. When you hover on the law options, it shows you an artwork. For example, if you choose organ harvesting law for funerals, it will show you a stitched up corpse. It's visceral. It grounds your actions, shows you what you're about to do on a micro level. It's not just marginal boost to medicine and research speed. It prompts you to think and maybe even ethically weigh the option, which extends the experience further than plain game mechanics. Even though it looks minor, it's a great choice. They clearly put thought into immersion, but far less into usability. What I didn't like about the law screen is how barren it looks. It's just plain text. And I know they were going for a bureaucratic look with all repeating section signs and white marble paper, but this is a game. I need icons, I need quick access to information on a glance. For example, from the top of my head, making icons look like stamps or adding ink pen scribbles. The game easily could have done both immersion and usability if any effort was put into it. And finally, Frostpunk's love for obscuring numbers starts to become downright ridiculous. It already was tenuous in the first game, but here, with increased complexity of the mechanics, it turns into some sort of a charade. What's funny is how inconsistent it can be, as if the game occasionally sleeps and shows you the numbers anyway. At times it almost feels apologetic to show you numbers at all. 120% research speed? This must be a mistake. Let me fix it for you. Area explored by 56%? No. In fact, there are way too many numbers on the screen. Here, way better. My stance on it, you should obscure if you have a meaningful reason. Trust and tension should be obscured. Those are not meant to be quantifiable. The game really needs to lighten its grip on this design philosophy. It has its purpose, but it should only be used when necessary.
Forced alignment.
In the past, Frostpunk was very keen on providing new experience. Every scenario had its own distinct theme, when they easily could have just provided a new map and drafted a different story. And I respect this commitment to novelty. Frostpunk 2 continues the trend and plunges us into the hell of democracy. I enjoyed the political system very much, in a mechanical sense and in a sense how it was written. There are a plethora of groups you need to think about. New Londoners, I see them as city folk, average Joes, the urban dwellers who are quick to pick up on new technology and maybe a little bit more pragmatic. Frostlanders, countrymen, survivalists or rednecks, outdoorsy types who love freedom, suspicious of authority, and appreciate roaming in nature. Faithkeepers, spiritual side of the population, with a key distinction from real-life religions being pro-technology. And it fits well into the setting, because the generator is the only thing keeping everyone alive. It's entirely believable some people will start seeing it as something more than it actually is. Evolvers, a faction with a pretty distinct premise, let's evolve resistance to cold. I feel like it's one of these unhinged ideas Harry Dubois from Disco Elysium would come up with in his heavily hungover state. It's still, despite its ridiculousness, a unique faction that has its place in the Frostpunk universe. So I quickly realized I didn't fully agree with Faithkeepers or Evolvers. Faithkeepers are humane, that's great, but giant isolationists, when exploration is an important part of our success, on top of being very traditional and refusing to adapt. Evolvers have great survival ideas that work, but if you have it their way, life itself will turn into hell, full of cutthroat laws and abuse. And so, with these players at the table, I get to roleplay as a politician. I decided to play all parties, keep everyone, if not happy, at least compliant. I set a goal to keep radicals in check so they don't gain too much power, but also not too weak so they counterbalance each other. All the while cherry-picking the ideas that I personally find the most suitable. It works especially well with multiple choices in law and research that can now also be changed as opposed to forever being locked in the first game. Running low on prefabs, enact a law that generates them. It's gotten too cold, change it to heat pipe watch. It's flexible. It adds a lot of complexity and freedom into the game if you are able to juggle these factions well and get what you want. I enjoyed it very much. Until came a pivotal choice. Here, game forces you to pick a side, completely ignoring the possibility that you don't want to do it. In fact, my whole playstyle was based on not taking sides. This is forced alignment. It leaves you no choice but to commit to a radical faction. I chose to defeat the Frost, which sided me with Faithkeepers, and of course keeping Evolvers happy started to become close to unmanageable. Because the game wants to engineer a story beat protest at the end of Whiteout. Then comes the Winterhome choice, where I liked the idea of an extra city, to which a pop-up warned me of making an inconsistent choice. Which is funny because it forced me into a choice originally, then calls me inconsistent. But this also made me realize there were never two pivotal choices, there was one. This one. It's just an alignment confirmation really. I went with Faithkeepers again just so we can see their side of the story, and on the next playthrough maybe play as Evolvers. And it's good that I did that because closer to the end the game redoubles its efforts to punish you for a hybrid playstyle with Zeitgeist mechanics, making any hopes of keeping it up become a pipe dream. At least there was a saving grace in the last choice. You banish a faction, you try to make peace, or third ending where you stop both factions and become the captain. Because I got so tired of them bickering like rowdy children, I chose that. Upending democracy and establishing dictatorship. To fully understand why Frostpunk 2 is so keen on forced alignment, it took me another playthrough, but more on that in a bit.
Pure ideology.
I've started a new run to see Evolver's side of the story. I skipped the prologue to my relief and discovered two new factions hidden away. New London Legacy faction. Stalwarts? How does that change? The fuck is Stalwarts? Long story short, I've decided to play purely for Stalwarts instead. I pushed for everything they wanted and suppressed the opposing faction, which was a breeze to achieve. In fact, the game becomes much easier if you commit to one faction. One left because of there might be a limit to 100. Condemn. 0 leave, yeah. There's a hard limit. 100 people of the community. It also becomes much more boring, because you surrender your agency, you no longer choose laws, ideas, even ethical dilemmas. You only exist to click on a choice marked by your faction. A huge layer of the game becomes obsolete. But what's interesting, I also got to see in what exactly the radical faction turns when you allow it to do whatever they wish. Stalwarts have Panacea Factory, which turns human remains into supplements added to food. Basically cannibalism with extra steps. This was most likely inspired by an old dystopian movie Soylent Green, but probably more up-to-date example of this idea for listeners would be Pluribus. The game also pulls from such dystopian classics as A Clockwork Orange and Brave New World, and there are probably a lot of other inspirations that I've missed. I got to see the natural conclusion to all the zeitgeists that caught my imagination, and experienced a lot more events, little stories in this new dystopian society. It was a much narratively richer experience than I got from my first playthrough. This kind of dark outcome is exactly what Frostpunk known for. The problem is, there's no emotional impact. The game even says in the end, or maybe you're lying to yourself, isn't every utopia is someone else's dystopia? Implying a deep realization, but I was just following stalwarts. I didn't feel a thing. All the responsibility for choices is lifted because those weren't my choices. In the first playthrough, where I chose based on my ethical preferences, the game bottlenecked me into decisions. The quest was oppressively guiding my progression without giving an outlet to my playstyle. Then, when it does, at the very end, the game finishes in a very rushed and heavily scripted fashion, and I'm left not feeling much. There really should have been more branching, especially for a more centric playstyle. That also goes for specific factions, because the choices are identical even if you play a different set. It does a disservice to their unique identity. And that is the crux of why I think Frostpunk didn't reach its potential. It failed to connect on an emotional level. They wanted to tell a dramatic story about ambition and dreams turning into nightmare, I get that, but I think they forgot that they are dealing with the player, not a piece of paper. You can't force somebody into a dramatic ending you intended and then expect them to like it. The trick was to make the player create the dystopia on their own accord. The player was supposed to be the author, not the game.
Pacing and miscommunication.
Pacing in Frostpunk 2 is pretty confused. Here's the breakdown of my first playthrough. It starts well, short prologue, well-paced initial 2 chapters. First one has its own identity, it focuses on finding your footing, balancing the essential resources, then dealing with quickly diminishing coal right before the eventual discovery of Venezuela. The second is about adapting to the new type of fuel and surviving the whiteout, which naturally sets the time limit. Both are fairly long and have time to breathe. They are distinct like eras of progression. Now the third one comes in, there is a protest that is resolved in a heartbeat and you initiate the colony in Whitestone. That's it. I was left wondering what was it even about. The game does tell you vaguely to take your time, but who knows what that means? The game has spent hours on conditioning me to follow the quest first. In chapter 2 I took my time researching social policies I was interested in, silly things like setting up good education system and pushing equality forward. When I came back to the quest, it became too cold to make all the districts warm, and I had to wait for a warmer season that was very close to the whiteout, just to be handed new set of objectives I barely managed to complete in time. So when it tells me to take my time, I don't trust it. Who knows what it will throw at me if I dilly-dally too much? Now I try to do objectives first, have fun later. In second playthrough I specifically didn't do that quest to see what happens. In third chapter I researched everything, reached all zeitgeists, suppressed the living crap out of pilgrims, got to see dystopia in all its glory, and the chapter was still going. To the point that I started doubting it had an end, but it does. What I've discovered, and what currently no wiki will tell you because they're all barren, it gives you exactly 300 weeks, after which every group gets a little bit upset and gives you 80 weeks to continue the quest. That's when it clicked. I finally saw that this chapter was actually about reaching your full potential. Starting the colony in Winterhome, ending the chapter is to be considered a point of no return, as later two quickly and inevitably spiral into an ending. It was never properly communicated. The fourth chapter has unique premise but is short. The biggest gripe I had with it is another giant miscommunication case. I got the remaining cores and it even asks me if I want to continue until we get all of them. Yes, I want all of them. While we are doing that, I'm upgrading the generator to save time, which is the objective. And after the completion, it pulls the entire colony out, leaving maybe 24 cores behind, along with all the buildings. I somehow needed to know that completing the objective does that without my confirmation. What? Excuse me? They left Winterhome? I didn't order them to do that. What the fuck? Just because the quest completed itself? Why didn't it warn me? I wanted to get all the fucking cores. At least, like, if you don't want to, like, create a whole button for, like, exiting the Winterhome, at least, like, warn me that if you finish the quest, I would have waited. I would have waited building that goddamn upgrade then. It's been like, what, I don't know, 20 extra cores probably left there. A lot of resources that I could have deconstructed back. But it all doesn't matter because the fifth chapter is so small it's 2 times shorter than the prologue. So as you can see, Frostpunk 2 has pacing issues. By dividing the game into chapters, it sets up expectations to deliver a measured part of the story in each. First two meet those, the third one is so flexible it can feel both rushed and overlong, depending on how you play, and the last two fly by like you slipped on the ice and hit the ending credits.
Utopia Builder.
I was expecting not to enjoy the endless mode, because it's unfulfilling to me to play something without a clear goal, but I actually liked Utopia Builder more than main scenario. It has a lot of content and customization, 8 new factions which represent every possible combination of zeitgeist, tales which are intermediate challenges you can add, and ambition, which is exactly what I need, an overarching goal. With those changes, the endless mode turned into a collection of mini-stories with quests serving as a challenge rather than a guide. There is a radical idea online that the entire main story is just a long tutorial to Utopia Builder. I wouldn't go that far, but there is definitely some truth to that. The lack of heavy-handed guidance finally lets the game shine. One of my best moments came from an Iceblood's protest. It started simply because I was siding with my favorite boys, the Technocrats, to absolutely no one's surprise, not giving Icebloods any mind. I couldn't stop it immediately because I was hard-pressed by other issues. As I was rushing to pass necessary laws and researching watchtowers, they spread to coal and oil sites, completely cutting off the city from fuel, causing the city to start freezing to death. It was a catastrophe, and it was a thrill to solve. It almost felt intentional, like the Icebloods knew exactly what they were doing, but that story emerged purely from the game's systems interacting with each other. Another standout moment was the apocalyptic whiteout. In the main story, whiteout is effortlessly dealt with.
Bring it on.
Wait. Oh, literally. Are we looking? This feels wrong. There's a whiteout and we're just doing fine. I'm guessing it is intentional subversion for the sake of the story, to maybe reinforce the idea that this new oil power generator is so amazing people can finally focus on reaching higher ambitions than just surviving. Regardless, it was a lackluster. In Utopia Builder though, the whiteout hits like a wrecking ball. Industry collapsed one sector at a time, we turned into sitting ducks, fuel reserves dropped so low we had weeks before the generator would shut down. That was it. I was grasping at straws, discarding any ethics, ready to do absolutely anything to keep the city alive. That's when Frostpunk finally had me. This is where the game could have layered in small narrative moments about desperation, last-minute miracles to really hammer the emotion home. With just a little more, this could have rivaled a New Home scenario from the first game, but I don't expect Endless Mode to carry the story. That was someone else's job. What saved us all was the progression cornerstone, the release of automatons that countered whiteout penalties just enough for us to steer away with tremendous effort from a complete disaster. For me, Utopia Builder delivered the emotional rollercoaster I was hoping to get from Frostpunk 2, and if you own the game and haven't tried it yet, I genuinely recommend that you do. One small thing to criticize, the transport menus for colonies during whiteouts become inaccessible, and all would be fine, but they still keep sending resources, only now you can't regulate how much. It creates absurd situations like when colonies would freeze to death themselves before sending less fuel to the city. If this works as intended, in which I'm not entirely certain, they needed either to not block the menu or cut transportation entirely for the period of the whiteout.
Closing entry.
At the end of the day, Frostpunk 2 loses in intimacy what it gains in scale. Ironically, the developers mirror the same overarching ambitions the game itself warns against. Bigger systems, bigger ideas, but a weaker emotional grip. I think it's a pretty average game, but I'll bump it up a notch for Utopia Builder. It took me 27 hours to complete, and I give Frostpunk 2 55 out of 100.
Machines are irreplaceable. You are not. Place their needs before your own.
That's funny.